The first sound you hear is not a voice. It is the echo of your own footsteps, hard and measured on marble, each step a verdict. In the first 8 seconds, I want you to feel the cold. A courtroom that breathes like a beast, fluorescent lights slicing the air, and behind me a laugh. Thin, deliberate, designed to wound. That laugh is a map. It marks the place where power learned to hide behind velvet and philanthropy, where cruelty learned to dress as charm. Listen, the gallery exhales, cameras tilt, a mother's smirk becomes the punctuation of a life. You think this is a private family quarrel. You are wrong. This is the anatomy of domination, and you are now standing in the dissecting room. If you stay, I will show you how gentle cruelty builds empires, how polite smiles engineer silence, and how a single forged signature can reroute a destiny. This is not a story about revenge. It is a lesson in recognition, how to see the pattern before the trap snaps shut. They taught you to bell. Eve, that lineage is law, that names are destiny, that smiling politely is survival. I was taught the same, until I learned to read the ledger behind the laughter. I will take you behind the curtains where the real scripts are written. Ledgers inked with favors, wills rewritten with the lightest of hands, quiet threats delivered like calls to dessert. Watch me move through rooms they think are secure. The study where a painting hides a safe, the glove compartment where a recording waits, the nursing home photo album that remembers what men of power prefer to forget. Each small betrayal is a stitch in a larger tapestry, elder abuse disguised as concern, forgery dressed as prudence, humiliation paraded as instruction. I will show you the tools they use to keep you small, the performance of civility, the doctrine of inheritance, the soft weapons of reputation. Stay with me now, because understanding the pattern is the first step to breaking it. Once you see how the machinery operates, why? Ul will never walk into a room the same way again. The day before the trial, the city was drowning in rain. The kind that doesn't fall, it hammers. I remember standing under that gray sky, watching water carve rivers through the courthouse steps, thinking how fitting it was. Storms cleanse, but they also expose what the ground tried to hide. In that moment, I wasn't just preparing to face my family, I was preparing to peel back the layers of a lie years in the making. My mother's laughter had always been her shield, sweet in public, venomous in private, and my brother's boredom, his weapon. They thought silence made them untouchable. They didn't know silence was the language I had mastered best. You see, they believed I had nothing, no witnesses, no money, no proof. They mistook quiet for defeat, but quiet was the soil I planted my revenge in. For months, I had collected fragments, a notarized document my mother swore didn't exist, a voice note my brother forgot he recorded, a foe, hidden in an old phone backup. Small things, invisible, irrelevant, until they formed a pattern. That pattern became my sword. And while they were laughing over dinner, bragging about how family issues should never leave the house, I was crafting my opening statement, not of words, but of truth sharpened into evidence. That night, before the trial, I looked into the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I'd changed, but because I finally looked like someone who stopped asking for permission to survive. The version of me they built, the obedient one, the apologetic one, had died quietly. What walked into that courtroom was something else, deliberate, patient, and ready to let the truth bleed if it had to. As the rain kept falling outside, I rehearsed every detail, not to convince the judge, but to remind myself that every scar had a timestamp, every humiliation had a receipt, and every smile they faked had a motive. By morning, when the sky cleared and the IR smelled like iron, I knew one thing: they were coming to win a case. I was coming to end a dynasty. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and arrogance. My mother sat in the front row, her pearls catching the light like they were mocking the sun. My brother leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, smirking every few seconds. To them, this wasn't a trial. It was a spectacle, a formality before victory. They believed that blood ties and influence would drown the truth, like it always had. When the judge entered, I didn't look at him. My eyes were fixed on the table across from me, the table where my family sat, confident, rehearsed, unbothered. My mother caught my gaze and smiled, the same way she used to when I was a child about to be scolded. That smile was her verdict before the verdict. I almost smiled back, almost. Then the first document was presented. It was a will, her handwriting, her signature, her greed neatly folded into official paper. She had rewrit 10 at 2 months before my father's death, leaving everything to herself and my brother. She thought I'd never find the original, the one my father signed before the illness, before the manipulation. But I had. And when the judge asked if I had evidence, I stood up without hesitation and slid a single envelope across the desk. Silence, the kind that eats sound itself. My lawyer unfolded the document, placed it side by side with theirs, and suddenly the courtroom was no longer theirs. The handwriting analysis, the witness affidavit, the bank records, they came like a quiet storm, one sheet at a time. My mother's smirk faltered for the first time. My brother's phone slipped from his hand. Every word I spoke after that wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Truth doesn't shout, it cuts. I explained how my mother forged documents under the guise of managing family assets, how my brother transferred funds disguised as gifts, how they laughed about it over dinner, calling it Family B. When the judge leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Lewis, would you like to explain these inconsistencies?" The world tilted. My mother opened her mouth, but the words never came. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a script. And as the courtroom watched her tremble, I realized, revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives wearing a calm face and holding a folder. The moment the handwriting expert confirmed a forgery, something inside the courtroom shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but heavy, like oxygen itself decided to turn against them. My mother's fingers trembled on the edge of her chair. My brother's confidence cracked into silence. You could almost hear the weight of every lie settling in the room. But they didn't know the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The judge asked if I had anything further to present. I nodded slowly, reaching into my briefcase. My lawyer's hand brushed mine, as if asking, "Are you sure?" I was. I had been sure for months. I heard the recording for the first time. That soft click of a phone mic picking up voices that were never meant to be heard. I placed the USB drive on the table. "Play Exhibit B," I said. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then came the sound of laughter, familiar, chilling. My mother's voice. "She really thinks Dad left her something? She's lucky we even let her use the last name." My brother chimed in, lazy and amused. "She won't find out. She doesn't even read the fine print. Just get her to sign whatever you need." And then the most haunting part, my mother's reply, quiet but sharp. "By the time she realizes what we did, it'll be too late. I'll make sure of that." The recording ended. The room was a vacuum. No coughs, no whispers, no movement. Even the judge froze for a breath too long. My mother's face had gone pale. Her perfect composure collapsed under the weight of her own words. My brother's jaw clenched so tight it looked like pain. For years they'd turned my silence into proof of weakness. Now that same silence had become evidence. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I looked at the judge, whose voice came low but steady. "Mrs. Lewis, this recording, is this your voice?" She tried to deny it, tried to laugh it off. But when the forensic audio report was displayed, her denial shattered. Every laugh, every word, authenticated. She was cornered by her own arrogance. In that instant, the power dynamic that ruled my entire life inverted. I was no longer the accused, the forgotten, the quiet one. I was the mirror, and they were being forced to look. That was the moment I realized revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about showing them the truth they swore would never see daylight. The silence that followed the recording wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every breath in the courtroom felt like it had to fight its way through shame. My mother's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit that didn't exist. The woe. Man who once commanded every dinner table, every decision, every dollar, now looked like a stranger caught under a light she couldn't escape. "Mrs. Lewis," the judge repeated, voice sharper this time, "is this your voice or not?" She didn't answer. Not at first. Her hands trembled so violently the pearls around her wrist clicked like teeth. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't the one I grew up fearing. It was small, almost childlike. "It was taken out of context," she whispered. But even she didn't believe it. The courtroom didn't either. My brother shifted in his seat, his jaw twitching, eyes fixed on her. For the first time I saw something new in him. Fear. He knew what was coming next, because what my mother didn't realize was that I hadn't only collected her words. I had collected his too. I reached for the second document, a signed authorization form under his name, transferring money from our father's account just 3 days before the death certificate was filed. The same account he claimed he never touched. When the papers hit the table, his composure cracked open like glass. "Mom, you said," he began, but she cut him off with a hiss, the kind that used to silence me as a child. But this time it didn't work. The judge had already taken the form. Her voice broke as she turned to him, whispering too late. "You weren't supposed to sign that, you were supposed to—" But he wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You recorded us? You set us up?" I didn't respond, because it wasn't setup, it was truth, the kind they'd buried under manipulation and guilt for years, the kind they thought I'd never have the courage to expose. My mother tried to stand, but her knees gave out. My brother reached to help her, and she shoved him away. The perfect alliance that had ruled my life, shattered, right there in front of everyone. The judge called for order, but there was no order left to restore. My mother began to cry. Not the kind that earns sympathy, but the kind that comes when every lie finally collapses under its own weight. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt release. Watching them unravel was not joy, it was justice. A quiet, necessary ending to years of deceit. When the judge finally raised his hand, the room hushed like the air itself knew what was coming. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, and then, stillness. He looked from me to my mother, then to my brother, as though measuring the years of deceit that hung between us. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. After reviewing the presented evidence, the forged documents, the authenticated recordings, and the financial records, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. It took me a second to process the words, in favor of the plaintiff. For so long those words had lived only in my imagination, a fantasy whispered to myself on sleepless nights. But now they were real, echoing across the courtroom. Stamping the truth into history. My mother's head dropped, her face hidden behind trembling hands. My brother muttered something under his breath, maybe a curse, maybe regret, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of the gavel striking wood. The judge continued. Assets will be restored to their rightful owner. Any further interference will result in criminal prosecution. And just like that, the empire they'd built on lies crumbled in public view. Years of manipulation, humiliation, control, undone in a few minutes of truth. But victory doesn't taste the way you think it will. There was no applause, no satisfaction, just a strange, heavy silence. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt empty. Because when justice arrives, it doesn't heal you. It just frees you to start healing yourself. As I gathered my files, I glanced at my mother. Her pearls were still shining under the courtroom lights, but they looked smaller now, almost pitiful. My brother avoided my gaze completely. The same people who once ruled every corner of my life now couldn't even look me in the eye. When I stepped outside, the sky had changed. The rain was gone, replaced by sunlight that felt too bright, too honest. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a final thud, a sound I would remember forever. A reporter tried to ask me how it felt to win. I didn't answer, because this wasn't about winning. Route exposed. The courtroom betrayal that shocked everyone. It was everywhere. My name, the one they'd mocked, erased, rewritten, now sat on every news banner in the city. But fame wasn't the victory I wanted. It was noise, empty, glittering noise. Because when the cameras turned off and the reporters left, I was alone again, standing in a small apartment filled with boxes of documents, evidence, and memories that felt like ghosts. They called it justice. I called it survival. My mother's lawyer tried to appeal, but the evidence was too strong. Within a week, the house, her house, legally became mine. The irony was cruel. The place where I was once told I contributed nothing was now written under my name in ink. I stood in front of the same white gates that used to close before I could reach them, and for a moment I couldn't move. Because victory has a strange aftertaste. It's not sweet. It's quiet, unsettling, almost hollow. When I walked inside, everything was exactly as she left it, the perfume still lingering in the hallway, the family portraits still hanging in perfect order, like they were guarding secrets instead of memories. I looked at a photo of the three of us, her smile, his smirk, my hesitation, and it hit me. Revenge doesn't erase the past, it just redefines who owns it. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from fighting. It comes from finally stopping. That night I stood in my father's old study, the room where it all began. The safe was still behind the painting, just as I remembered. Inside I found his journal. The pages were yellowed, fragile, but his handwriting was still strong. The last line read, "Truth doesn't destroy families, lies do. But only the brave get to prove it." I closed the book and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maybe that was the real victory. Not reclaiming money or property, but reclaiming the truth my father died protecting. because revenge, when done right, isn't about punishment, it's about liberation. And sometimes walking through the ashes is the only way to prove you survived the fire. For days the house felt like a museum, beautiful, silent, and cold. Every corner whispered memories I didn't ask for. The chandelier above the staircase still glimmered like it did when I was a child, but now it looked more like a relic than a treasure. The laughter that once echoed in these halls had been replaced by something heavier. Truth. I didn't sleep in my mother's room. I couldn't. I chose the smallest guest room at the end of the hallway, the one that used to smell like dust and disuse, maybe because it was the only space in the entire house that didn't lie. From there I could see the garden, the same one she used to host her charity parties in, smiling for cameras, talking about family values. The same garden where once I'd overheard her telling my father that I'd never be strong enough to carry the family name. Now was mine. Every petal, every stone, every inch of earth. But owning something doesn't mean you belong to it. I realized that as I walked through the corridors. Wealth and victory don't fill the emptiness left by betrayal. They just echo louder inside it. I thought about selling the house, burning every reminder of them from my life. But when I stood in the study again, looking at my father's journal, something inside me shifted. This house wasn't just their monument. It was his too. And he had fought silently for years, trying to protect what was right. Walking away felt like abandoning his unfinished sentence. So I made a decision, not of revenge, but of purpose. I wouldn't sell the house. I would rebuild it. Not into a home, that word had lost its meaning, but into a refuge. A place for those who'd been silenced, manipulated, or betrayed by their own families. A sanctuary for the quiet fighters. The first thing I did was remove the portraits from the wall. My smiling face that had lied to me. Gone. In their place, I hung a single frame, my father's journal page, sealed behind glass. The words that saved me. That night, for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive, as if it was exhaling after years of holding its breath. I sat by the window, the moonlight tracing the edges of my victory, and I finally understood. The best revenge isn't taking back what was stolen. It's creating something they can never touch again. Peace. It started with a knock, soft, hesitant, the kind of knock that carries both apology and fear. I almost didn't open the door. The house had been quiet for weeks, and I'd learned to protect that silence like treasure. But something about that sound made me pause. When I opened the door, the past was standing there, in a suit 2 sizes too big, eyes heavy, voice small. My brother. He looked nothing like the man who once smirked across the courtroom. His confidence was gone, replaced by something regret, or maybe desperation. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. No words, no excuses. Just the ghosts of what used to be family, standing on opposite sides of a threshold. I didn't come for money, he said finally, voice trembling. I just needed to say I didn't know it would go that far. I wanted to laugh, not out of cruelty but disbelief, because that's what they always say when the fire finally burns them too. I didn't know. But he did. He had known enough to stay quiet while they buried me in lies. He had known enough to help forge the chains. I have nothing left, he continued. Mom doesn't talk to me. She blames me for losing everything. Maybe she's right. For a second, the air thickened between us. I could see the outline of the boy he used to be, the one who used to sneak me cookies after dinner before ambition turned him into a stranger. I stepped aside. Come in, I said. He hesitated before crossing the doorway as if afraid the house itself would reject him. And maybe it should have. But forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a gift for the guilty. It's freedom for the one who survived. We sat in the study, the same room where my father's journal now hung framed on the wall. My brother's eyes landed on it and I watched his face crumble. He always believed in you, he said quietly. He told me once you'd be the one to save us. I didn't believe him. For a moment the silence between us wasn't heavy, it was human, fragile, real. I'm not here to save anyone, I said softly. I just stopped letting anyone bury me. He nodded, tears threatening, and I realized something. Revenge had ended the war, but forgiveness might end the echoes. When he left, I didn't feel hate anymore, just distance, necessary, honest distance. As the door closed behind him, I whispered something I'd never dared to say before. We're finally free. She arrived unannounced, the way storms always do. No call, no warning, just the echo of her heels. On the marble porch, the faint scent of her perfume lingering before she even knocked. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, smaller somehow, thinner, her posture no longer that of a queen but of a ghost wearing the crown's shadow. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The air between us held years of things unsaid, accusations, confessions, apologies that never came. Her eyes darted past me, taking in the house she'd once ruled. It was no longer hers. The portraits were gone, the furniture rearranged, the silence different. This wasn't her kingdom anymore. It was evidence of everything she'd lost. "You redecorated," she said finally, her tone brittle. "I had to," I replied. "There was too much history in the walls." Her lips pressed together, the faintest tremor breaking through her composure. "I didn't come to fight," she said, but her voice betrayed her. It shook. "I came to see if you're satisfied, if destroying your family finally made you happy." I almost Ughed. The words were pure her, guilt disguised as grace. "You destroyed it yourself," I said. "I just stopped pretending. It wasn't already broken." She flinched but didn't look away. "You think you know everything, but you don't," she whispered. "I did what I had to do. Your father trusted you," I cut in, "and you turned that trust into a weapon." For the first time I saw it, not anger, not pride, but fear, real, naked fear, the kind that comes when control is gone and truth is irreversible. Her hands shook as she reached for the back of a chair. "You're just like him," she said, almost to herself. "That's what scares me." I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had raised me, broken me, taught me how power works, and without realizing it, taught me how to dismantle it too. She wasn't a monster. She was a mirror, showing me everything I refused to become. "I'm not like him," I said quietly, "and I'm not like you either. That's the difference." For a heartbeat, he just stood there, eyes glistening. Then she turned toward the door, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe you'll be the only one who survives us." When the door closed behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat in the stillness, realizing that closure isn't about apologies. It's about accepting that some people will never see the truth, even when it's standing right in front of them. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, the same way it had before the trial. Only this time I wasn't afraid of the storm. I was the calm after it. The next morning the world felt still, not silent, just finally mine. The air coming through the open window carried no whispers of judgment, no footsteps of the past. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up preparing for a fight. I woke up ready to live. I made coffee, not in a rush, not while checking my phone for legal updates or messages from lawyers, but slowly, deliberately. The sound of the cup against the count. R felt like music. That's how healing begins, not with fireworks, but with small, almost invisible moments that remind you've survived. The house had changed. The walls, once filled with family portraits, were now lined with frames of my own making, my photography, my memories, my truth. The living room where my mother used to hold her perfect dinners now had sunlight spilling across an unfinished canvas. I'd started painting again, something I hadn't done since my father's death. Each stroke of color felt like reclaiming another piece of myself she'd tried to erase. The world outside moved on. My mother vanished into silence, no calls, no apologies. My brother sent the occasional message, always careful, always brief. I didn't hate them, I just didn't belong to their world anymore. I took a job offer I'd once turned down, a position at a legal aid foundation helping families who'd been cheated by those they trusted most. Every story I heard echoed fragments of mine. Manipulation, betrayal, quiet endurance. But this time, I wasn't the one standing alone in a courtroom. I was the one helping someone else stand tall. One afternoon, after a long day of cases, I returned home to find an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just my initials written in trembling handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a faded photograph of my father and me, taken years ago at the lake. On the back, 2 words in my mother's familiar cursive: "I'm sorry." I didn't know if she meant it. I didn't need to. Some apologies aren't meant to fix what was broken. They're just proof that guilt finally found its voice. I placed the photo on my desk beside my father's journal and whispered, "I made it, Dad." The rain started again outside, but it didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like renewal, like the world was finally washing everything clean. Because in the end, justice wasn't the victory. Peace was. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is finally being free and not to need one. Years later, I returned to that same courthouse, not as a victim, not as a defendant, but as a speaker. The air smelled the same: polished wood, old paper, and echoes of voices that once held power over me. But this time, I wasn't afraid of any of it. I stood at the podium facing a room full of young law students, advocates, and survivors. People who, like me once, thought justice was something you begged for instead of something you built. As I looked across the rows of faces, I saw versions of myself. Broken, determined, trembling, hopeful. The words I'd prepared on paper suddenly felt too small for the truth inside me, so I spoke from memory. I used to think revenge was the only way to heal, I began. That if I could make the people who hurt me feel what I felt, I'd finally be free. But I was wrong. Revenge might balance the scales, but it doesn't fill the emptiness they leave behind. Healing does. The room was silent, every eye on me, every heart wait. Eyeing for something real, something human. I learned that power isn't in the courtroom or the verdict, I continued. It's in the moment you decide that your story doesn't end in pain, that the people who betrayed you no longer get to define the next chapter. That's where freedom begins. I paused, letting the words settle. Then I smiled, not the kind of smile that hides scars, but one that accepts them. Your past doesn't disappear, I said softly. But one day it stops hurting. One day it becomes your proof that you survived something meant to destroy you and came back stronger, kinder, and unbreakably real. When the talk ended, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. My mother did the same thing to me, she whispered. But seeing you here, it makes me believe I can make it too. I reached for her hand and said the only words that ever mattered. You already have. That night I walked home beneath the same stars my father used to show me when I was little. The same sky that had watched me lose everything, and then rebuild it piece by piece. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't need to. The past no longer lived there. It lived in me, reshaped, redeemed. And as the wind brushed past, I smiled and whispered to the quiet world, some stories begin with betrayal, but the real ones end with peace.